say this. You can't kill these Lions. Lions kept their playoff hopes alive with a win on Thursday night against the Dallas Cowboys. We will talk about all that and more on today's episode of All Say This. Welcome into the show. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, just want to throw a few plugs out there. At Castellani2014 on Twitter. At Chris Castellani on TikTok. We are available on TikTok, like I said. You can find us on YouTube as well. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, available in audio form on Spotify, and of course, CastellaniContent.com, being updated all the time with the content that Austin and I create. All right, let's move on. And a lot to discuss on today's show across multiple sports, but we're going to start with what went down first this week, and that was the Lions taking care of business in a really exciting 44-30 victory against the Dallas Cowboys to push their record to 8-5. It was another game at home that the Lions absolutely had to have. I mean, I would argue they had to have the Green Bay one as well, but they coughed that one up. If they wanted to even pretend to have a shot at making the playoffs, they had to beat Dallas, a Dallas team that came in having won 3 in a row. And I said this in my post-game video, but the game itself ended up becoming exactly what I expected it to be, which was a high-scoring game between two offenses with a whole lot of weapons. And while I'm not super thrilled about where the Lions defense is at right now, and they had another devastating injury, which I will talk about, they won the turnover battle. And they won the turnover battle handily. 3 turnovers for the Cowboys. Lions with 0 turnovers early on in the game. And this is where I have a trust in Dan Campbell and this coaching staff that has never existed with any other Lions coaching staff. And that's not to say that I think Brian Schottenheimer is going to do some terrible job. In fact, so far, I think his approval rating for a hire that wasn't met with a lot of praise has been fine. But, you know, the Lions know their team, and this coaching staff knows their players, and they do such a great job of getting the ball to their weapons in space. That was always something that bothered me in previous regimes. Like Calvin Johnson, I remember, this is such a Lions statistic. Calvin Johnson, the year that he broke the record for most receiving yards, I think he had 5 touchdowns. Like, for a guy who broke the receiving yardage record, you'd think you'd just throw a fade route to this guy every time you're inside the 10, and they never would. This team does such a great job of using, even at points, borderline overusing the weapons they have. You know, you weren't sure if Amon-Ra St. Brown was even going to play. He ends up having a monster game. Jamison Williams has stepped up over the last several weeks with some guys who've been down. Jahmyr Gibbs, what can you say? I mean, 3 more touchdowns on the ground. He had an even bigger impact catching the ball out of the backfield. He is going to absolutely be one of the favorites for Offensive Player of the Year. He's been as valuable to this team as anybody in the NFL. He's an exceptional player to watch, and he's one of those guys that, like the best running backs in the NFL, on games where maybe your rushing attack isn't firing on all cylinders, because it wasn't. Demo had that one long run. Besides that, you know, Jahmyr didn't really break any until the end, but just to have him on the field and knowing whether it's the run game or the pass game that you have the ability to put the ball in this guy's hands, and when you do, especially in open space, there's nobody in the league faster than him. It's a guarantee he's going to make at least one man miss, probably more. And the Lions were getting him the ball early and often. Thought Goff played a really good game, a clean game. And the Lions came away from it with a victory to keep themselves alive. And look, this is where it gets tough, because I truly, and I know the Lions have lost some games that they shouldn't have lost, I believe this is a team that's good enough to be in the playoffs. Genuinely. And look, over the next 4 weeks, maybe in my opinion, that's going to change. But ever since the playoffs expanded to 14 teams, so there's that extra team in each league, there's some years where that 7 seed really isn't much. And you look at them and you say, okay, you know, there probably wouldn't be a playoff team, but they got in by virtue of expansion. It is what it is. But, you know, this year, the NFC is so ridiculously tough that there's going to be a really good team that's going to miss out on making the postseason. The Lions have a group that's good enough to do it, and it would feel like a missed opportunity if they didn't make the playoffs. Sadly, and Mike Valenti had a take about this that he brought up on his show last week, and I do think it's true. Coming into the year, I felt like expectations, it was fair to put those expectations as that of a team that could make it to and win a Super Bowl. Much like last season, where you had just a devastating number of injuries, you've had those same issues emerge again in 2025. And look, they had a lot of them, and it felt like they were able to, you know, stay on their feet a little bit. Brian Branch Achilles injury, not only out for the rest of this season, but probably out for a good chunk of next season as well, not only changes the trajectory of this campaign and the rest of this run in 2025, but it'll be interesting to see how Brad Holmes plays things because, look, Branch is an exceptional player, right? But you're going to be without him for close to a calendar year. And Achilles injuries, we've seen it in a lot of different sports now. Football's a violent game, and you don't really know whether or not he's going to be able to come back and be the dominant, heavy-hitting Brian Branch that he was in the first several years of his career. Just a brutal, brutal injury for Branch, a brutal injury for the Lions. And I think that this team, with the flaws they have and now with the injuries they have reached a point where, look, you want to win a Super Bowl, and this organization, to their credit, they now operate like a real organization to a point where if you come up short and you don't go on a run in the playoffs, it is understandably considered a disappointment. But this team is flawed, and I think they've had their flaws on their sleeves for a while, and it's one of those things where the deadline is passed. You're not going to get any healthier. The issues you have are the issues that are going to remain for the remainder of your season, and I don't know how you clean up the ineffective offensive line play. You could try to mask it at points, and I don't know how you clean up these injuries. You can't. This team's banged up today. They'll be banged up tomorrow, and they were banged up yesterday. And without a player like Brian Branch, who at his peak is an all-pro caliber player, and Kirby Joseph, somebody who last season led the NFL in interceptions, it seems like there's a real issue with the knee there. It's degenerative. He's been in practice. He's been out of practice. Who knows if and when he does come back, if he's going to be healthy. I just don't think that when you look at where this team is at as a whole, that this is a group that even if they make the playoffs can go on a deep run. And look, their schedule remains tough. Their next game's in LA, dude. They got to go up against the Rams. And I think with this group, they are mentally and physically tough enough to pull off an upset like that and scratch and claw their way into the postseason. Once we get beyond that, I can't really make any guarantees because I say it all the time. If you want to be a champion, if you want to make a deep run, you got to be super talented as well. But you also got to be a little bit lucky and a little bit healthy. And those last two things go hand in hand. You got to have good injury luck. 2 years ago, I remember Nolan Bianchi brought this up on Chris and Company when we interviewed him before the season. 2 years ago, the team that lost the NFC Championship game, that was one of the healthiest groups in the NFL going into the postseason. Last year, they were riddled with injuries. I mean, historically riddled with injuries. This year, it looks like it's going to be more of the same, and as fun as they can be to watch, and while I still think that there's a possibility that they can get into the playoffs, hell, maybe even win a playoff game, the expectations, in my opinion, have greatly lowered for what the playoffs might look like just because, and it's really no fault of their own, it's just the fact that the injuries have been so brutal for this team, and I just don't know, even with a good coaching staff like what this team has, how you could be able to clean all of that up. All right, let's move on here and discuss a little bit of college hoops. I just want to get Michigan out of the way real quickly as, I mean, this is becoming a weekly slurp fest, but Michigan only played one game, and it was a game against Rutgers, which was not necessarily one that I viewed as a trap game, but they hadn't played since that very emotional, high leverage series in Las Vegas, so it'd been over a week. They were coming back home, first Big Ten game against Rutgers. You have a whole week of people praising you and talking about how you might be the best team in the country and posting all these stats about how you're beating teams by 30. And look, those were legitimate victories, right? It was remarkably impressive what they're able to do. I mean, Gonzaga, the team that Michigan beat by 40, just beat Kentucky by like 37. Now, I think Mark Pope has a real problem in Lexington there, but that's conversation for another day. But still, like you're beating quality opponents. You're going up against Rutgers, which typically, even if you win, is a team that has the ability with Steve Peichel to kind of get you down in the mud and get into a rock fight with you. It didn't happen on Saturday. Michigan runs Rutgers off the floor in a game that I was at. Great atmosphere at Chrysler Center. And man, I mean, I think Rutgers led 2-0 to begin the game, but it was another game by the under 16 timeout in the first half. You're watching it and you're saying, yeah, they're going to run them off the floor again because Michigan has guys that can take you one-on-one and get to the basket. They have more size than any team they're going to play most likely. And then in the second half, they started to spread the floor a little bit more, and all of a sudden they were knocking down jump shots like they were layups, hitting 3-pointers like crazy. And, there's going to be those nights, and we've seen them, and we don't want them to peak too early, right? But we've seen these moments so far very early in this season where when this team is on, their biggest opponent's going to be themselves because I don't think at their peak, I'll go ahead and say it right now on December 8th. I don't think at their peak there's any team in the country better than Michigan. Now, good teams have high ceilings. Some good teams have low floors. And we've seen, kind of a wide array so far with Michigan. I mean, they were inches away from losing to Wake Forest, who I don't think is that bad, but they didn't play great in that game. TCU played them really tough. Now, it seems like TCU might end up being okay. They beat Florida a few weeks back. Florida was a top 10 team, defending national champion, but you get my point. When Michigan's at their best, I think they could be better than anybody in the Big Ten, maybe even anybody in the country. I'm going to keep preaching this, man, until we get there. The Big Ten schedule and the Big Ten and that grind of the conference season, it really impacts you. It impacts you mentally and it impacts you physically. And I think it's going to be even worse now than it's ever been because of the fact that you have West Coast trips in the Big Ten. Now, that's not something that existed 2 years ago. It is a conference that really tests you. It's why, a lot of Big Ten teams, get to March. It's why a lot of them make the tournament, is because they go through that grind and they pick up those quad one wins. Michigan at some point this season is going to have things go sideways. Okay. They're not going to go 40-0. And what I will be interested in seeing is how this team is going to respond to adversity if and when it inevitably comes. I have a ton of faith in them because I think that they're not only a mature team from a mental standpoint, but just from a talent standpoint. God, they got not just a little bit of everything. They got a lot of everything. They are so fun to watch when they're peaking, but things are going to go sideways at some point. And I don't know when it's going to be, probably in the conference season at some point, hopefully not in March. And the true testament of what this team is will be how they respond to that adversity when it inevitably comes. I have a ton of faith in them. And like with any season, I try to just enjoy it for what it is. You don't win college basketball games by 40, and you don't win Big Ten games by 40. And for this team to be doing it, it's why I can't shy away from the smoke. I can't shy away from anybody who's saying, rank them number one. They deserve to be number one in the country. And look, you get ranked number one at this point in the season, it's inevitable you're going to fall off. Nobody starts the year at number one and ends the year at number one, right? Rarely ever happens. Almost never happens, right? So they'll fall off at some point. But for the time being, you have to appreciate the way that this team has played up to this point, because it's a team that entered the year with very high expectations. And now those expectations have been even more elevated. And I think that they have done a good job of embracing that. Dusty May said before this team played a game this season with confidence, I think we have the pieces to win a national championship. And I think that he has a way, both as a speaker and as a coach, of having this confidence and instilling a confidence in his team that doesn't go to the point of arrogance. These guys believe in themselves. They want to win a national championship. They know they're good players. But I also don't view this as a team that's going to take any opponent for granted. I think that's a wonderful quality to have. Super fun watching them play right now. Michigan State remained undefeated until they played their game against Duke on Saturday. An amazing atmosphere at the Breslin Center in a game that felt like it was going to be another huge moment for this Michigan State team for so much of it. For so much of it, they were physically tougher than Duke. They were knocking down some shots early. They had a lead. Really, through a heavy majority of the game, went into halftime with a lead. And you felt like, look, Izzo's had a lot of moments. He's 30 years into his career. I'm not going to say it was necessarily going to be a defining win, but Michigan State beats Duke in that game. And we're looking at a possibility of two of the top three ranked programs in the country being from this state. I mean, with the strength of schedule that Michigan State's had, if they knock off Duke in that game, it's not out of the realm of possibility they're ranked 4, maybe even 3 in the current rankings. And they just kind of fell off a little bit. It was a physical game, kind of an ugly game, really. I mean, Michigan State, despite having the lead for a majority of it, only shot, I think, 31% from the floor. Ironically, I actually think had a better shooting percentage from the 3-point line than they did from the just from the field as a whole. Duke rattled some free throws late, but then they made some big time shots near the end. Boozer was big in the second half. Really good game, and you could tell Izzo was, I think the term he used was pissed off. He felt like it was a wasted opportunity. Michigan State can play with Duke, and Michigan State can beat Duke. I think he felt like had they have stayed the course the way that they had up to this point in the season, they had the opportunity to do it. And they didn't play their best ball in the last 10 minutes of that game. And I think really with this Michigan State team, comparing them to last season, where I came into that season a year ago, kind of down on Michigan State. And I even said on this show I was going to judge that team a little bit differently. And that team, to me, for the most part, despite a bump in the road here and there, got progressively better as the year went along. And I remember by the time they beat up Michigan, the second time they played them at the Breslin and won the Big Ten outright. I remember saying, yeah, you know what? Do I think there's better teams in the country? Yes, but I do think this team can play for a national championship. I do think they can make the Final Four. So I felt like they were on an upward trajectory for a lot of that season. I don't know if I'm going to feel that way about this team and it's going to be entirely dependent on their backcourt. Their bigs are tremendous. Carson Cooper had 16 and 16 against Duke. I mean, it's really too bad because he'd be the toast of the town today and what we talked about nationally if they would have won that game. I mean, played a really incredible game. Jackson Kohler's turned into an exceptional player. You know, on most nights, Michigan State's length and Michigan State's size will be good enough to win most of their games. But they will play those games against the elite opponents, the Purdues, the Dukes, the Michigans of the world, where those teams will have enough size, not to stop necessarily, but to contain and at least push Michigan State's bigs and force MSU as a team out to the perimeter. And what it will come down to at that point is Michigan State's outside shooting. Now, a year ago, we had a lot of these same questions, and Jace Richardson and Trey Holloman emerged as legitimate outside threats. Would you call Michigan State's team last year a great outside shooting team? No, but they created that ability. It's like using the run to set up the pass. You know, just having some semblance of a run game allows you to open things up with play action and in pass protection. Just knowing that you have the threat of outside shooting allows you to space the floor much more effectively and get your ball to the bigs in one-on-one situations down low. Michigan State's backcourt didn't make a shot in the second half, and it's ultimately what cost them. And you could tell that not only John Shire, but pretty much every team that Michigan State is going to play for the remainder of the season is going to have that goal of trying to force Michigan State to beat you with their outside shooting. Now, there will be nights, this is just the way life is in college basketball, there's going to be certain nights, like the Kentucky game, where they're making those outside shots and they just get hot. And all of a sudden, you know, Michigan State looks like a freight train. But it is clear at this point that there is a weakness that other teams are going to try to exploit. Now, last season, I felt like as the year went along, Michigan State did a much better job of minimizing that weakness, and they got better, and they still could. But right now, I still think this Michigan State team is excellent. I think that their goals are very much in front of them. They lose a game like this every single year, usually multiple games like this, often at home, whether it's to Duke or one of the top teams in the country. I don't really believe in bad losses necessarily, but I don't come away from the Duke loss feeling any differently about Michigan State. I view it more as a missed opportunity than anything, but I think it is very clear, and this is often what happens when you play so many good opponents in the early part of your season. You know, they have good coaches. They have good players that are going to try to exploit your weaknesses, and right now I think the passing ability of Michigan State's backcourt, second to none. Jeremy Fears is an elite facilitator, but other teams are going to try to get those players to beat you by going to the basket and making outside shots. And there's going to be certain nights where they'll be able to do it, but there will be a lot of nights, at least as of right now, where they're probably going to come up short. Another thing I wanted to cover, and this is Michigan State related, but I view it as really huge news. You know, obviously I know the basketball team lost to Duke, but as a whole, this was a very good week for Michigan State athletics. And this is something that I want to talk about because I feel like I've mentioned it in passing, not even in passing, just straight up. We've done segments on it in the past. And I think that this was a really big week for Michigan State and the future of Michigan State athletics. Let's talk about it. Greg and Dawn Williams, I hadn't heard of, and I apologize. You know, runs a tech company, it seems like, so he's obviously super rich. Announced a historic $401 million commitment to Michigan State athletics, their Force Sparta initiative, which is kind of their big push into the 21st century, whether it's updated facilities, more NIL money, what have you. $401 million, obviously an insane sum total of money. And this is absolutely huge. And it's something that I've talked about with Michigan State athletics, and I've talked about it especially with the football program. Look, I think the basketball program is they're kind of grandfathered in. Like, they've had so much success under Izzo. Izzo continues to adjust. He continues to adapt. They'll be good as long as he's here. But I've talked about this with the football program. No, ever since that Kenneth Walker year, the football program has steadily declined. And I don't know if I've ever specifically said it, but I've kind of implied it, which is I felt like Michigan State athletics and the athletic department especially being as passive as they've been regarding their plan for spending has put their ceiling only so high. And while I think the Pat Fitzgerald hire has a very high approval rating, I talked about this on last week's show. I need a commitment to spending before I could feel like MSU is even at a point where they can put themselves, even where they can even want to put themselves in a universe with the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Oregons of the world. Okay. I'm not saying they are there yet. Yeah, they got a long ways to go. They still got to recruit. They still got to develop. They still got to win, and they still got to jump a lot of teams. It is harder to win in this conference than it has ever been, partially because of the current age, with the amount of money certain schools have, but also just because of the fact that there's so many teams in this conference. With that said, the way that I felt about Michigan State football over the last several years is like their ceiling is probably 8-4. 9-3. You get a good coach in there. Their ceiling is probably like a Minnesota, where PJ Fleck I think does a really good job at Minnesota, but they can only reach so high. And I know they had that one 11-win season, but even that was 2019. I mean, that feels like forever ago. I don't know how good Pat Fitzgerald's going to be at Michigan State, and I don't know how good Michigan State football as a whole is going to be. I do know that this commitment elevates their ceiling and raises their potential a ton. Michigan State athletics, the football program especially, had to push themselves into this modern age of college football. Okay, Michigan's done it. Ohio State has done it. Oregon's done it. Hell, we live in a world where Indiana, big spenders, the Indiana Hoosiers, the second losingest college football program of all time, was celebrating in Indy as Big Ten champions. Texas Tech just won their first conference championship. Why? They bought themselves a ton of talent, including a big-time defense and an insane defensive line. Okay, it is possible, and I'm not saying Michigan State's going to get there, but for the first time in several years, I feel like they have finally pushed their chips into the center of the table. I think that you have to give Jay Batt a ton of credit for that, but also it is very clear, and Michigan basketball, I think, went through something similar with Juwan. It is very clear, as long as Jonathan Smith was the coach at Michigan State, these big backers, these heavy donors, they weren't going to give this program a dime. They didn't trust him as a coach. They didn't trust him with that money. And I understand it. It's weird how Michigan basketball became big spenders the same time that they hired Dusty May. It's similar to Michigan State brings in Pat Fitzgerald, who I think at worst is an excellent figurehead for the organization. Like, I think for the university and as a program, he's a great kind of CEO. And now you're going to have Jay Batt and all these big donors that are going to supply him potentially with the resources and hopefully the players for him to be able to develop. So it is a big moment for them. And I just kind of want to put a bookend on it because I've criticized the university. I've criticized the athletic program for being so blasé and passive about what their spending commitment is going to look like. They have made it very clear what it's going to look like. And I'm not saying they're going to be one of the big boys, but they definitely now have the financial ability to play with the big boys. Okay, a couple more things. This college football related. Michigan will play Texas on New Year's Eve in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl. Not the Cheez-It Bowl, not the Citrus Bowl. Okay? If you're saying that, you're wrong. Stop fucking around. It is the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl. The company of Cheez-It and Mark Citrus, the man who's in charge of the Citrus Bowl, they combine forces, and they will play Texas on New Year's Eve. Look, bowl games at this point that aren't playoff games, it's so whack. I mean, Notre Dame, breaking news here, by the time I'm recording this, just declined to play in a bowl game because they didn't make the playoff, and we've seen guys sit out and everything, and I'm sure Texas will have guys sit out. I don't know what their situation looks like. I'm going to have to look more into Texas. Other than Arch Manning, there's not a whole lot that I know about this current version of Texas football. With that said, I'm actually going to be paying closer attention to how Michigan performs in this bowl game. And I think it actually kind of matters about how the fan base is going to feel going into next season. Because if the season ended today, which it doesn't, you still have one more game. But right now, the lasting image of the 2025 version of Michigan football, team, 146, is that of one that basically couldn't run an offense and got shut down, manhandled, out-toughed, outmanned against Ohio State. And your big concern is the development of your quarterback who threw for 60-something yards in the biggest game of his career up to this point. Everything, and it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on the player. It's a lot of pressure on the coaching staff. Everything that we feel about Michigan football going into 2026, both positive and negative, will be entirely dependent on the development of Bryce Underwood. And while maybe Michigan wins this game against Texas, I think they probably won't, but I need a good game from Bryce. I need to see something from the offense that has me saying, okay, you know what? Maybe this year wasn't great, but there's the pieces here for next year that you can feel good about. And look, the portal's going to have something to do with this, right? They're going to have to go out and get some players, and get the pieces to be able to help their quarterback. But this is a bowl game I'm actually going to be paying some attention to because I think word is pretty much out that this team was underwhelming this year and that their record is more so a reflection of their schedule than it was really being a quality opponent necessarily. So it's something that I'm going to keep an eye out on. I want to see a good game from Michigan, a well-played game in this bowl game for me to feel good about what 2026 is going to look like. All right, one final thing, and it is Tigers related. Look, this week we might have some news. Obviously, they signed Drew Anderson. I'm not gonna I already made my video about that. I think I probably spent too much time talking about it, but winter meetings this week, Buster Olney came out and now said that he would be surprised if the Tigers don't trade Tarik Skubal. I've heard a million different reports from a million different reporters, some emphatic that he will be a Tiger next year, some emphatic that he won't be a Tiger next year. I don't know what to believe anymore, and I think the biggest reason for that, why we've had so much inconsistency with the reporting, and I'm not blaming the reporters, have you? I mean, they have their sources, but the reason for so much inconsistency is I genuinely don't think Scott Harris knows what the plan is. And part of me finds that admirable, and part of me is very scared by that because Cody Stavenhagen has talked about it, and I think that he is correct. It would be better for Detroit to pick a lane. If you want to go in with this year and Tarik Skubal, great. Bring him back, go make some moves, put together a team that you think can make a run. Or dangle him out there like a carrot and get an overwhelming offer and make a push. I think this kind of, lying in wait thing, like your Aaron Burr, kind of waiting for things to pan out isn't great. You got to be in the room where it happens. And that scares me with Scott Harris. And it's just another example. This is just who they are. They believe themselves just to know a little bit more than other teams. There is an arrogance to the way that they go about their business. And look, if it works like it did in 24, everyone's, singing their praises and talk about what a great job he's doing. And if it falls apart like it did last season, you're going to get criticized for it. But I think as a whole, so much of how this organization feels about Scott Harris and this front office is going to be determined by how they handle this situation. If they, I'm just going to throw this hypothetical out there. If they don't trade Tarik and add a few pieces, make a run and make it to the ALCS next year, which is one round farther than they've made the last two seasons, and lose, I don't know about you guys. I'm not going to be upset by it. I'm going to say, hey, then you know what they went for? They made a run. They had a great time with Tarik here. He's going to go get $400 million from another team, and we could call it a day. I'll be disappointed that he's not a Tiger for life, and I think that that's something more so to do with ownership than it does the front office. But I don't know. I don't view it as a World Series or bust thing, but it's a big problem that plagues baseball, and it's not just in Detroit. How many teams right now can you definitively say are going to try to win a World Series next season? And Dodgers, sure. I think it's very clear the Blue Jays now, especially after the year that they just had, but there's not many. And that's an issue that's existed with the Tigers for a long time is we're good now. Okay, I know there's frustrations. They have a good team. They've been to the playoffs the last 2 years. That means you have a good team. And it still doesn't feel like they believe in the core that they have. And it's nerve-wracking because 3 years down the road when McGonigal and Clark and Briseño are in their primes, are we still going to be having the same conversation about a team that's trying to nickel and dime their way to the postseason? I don't know. And I don't know how this Tarik situation ends. And I feel bad because I want to be not necessarily an insider, but I want to have some opinions formed when it comes to the Skubal stuff, and I just don't. We've heard so many conflicting reports. It's frustrating. All right. That will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We are on TikTok as well at Chris Castellani. Find us on YouTube. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, available in audio form on Spotify, and of course, CastellaniContent.com being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. We will be back. We're going to get a guest for Chris and Company this week and next, and we got one more I'll say this for the year. Next week will be our final week of content for 2025 outside of the post-game videos that I do. Austin and I are going to be taking a little break, and we will be enjoying it. Things have been kind of hectic lately. And I, as much as we love doing this, it's just look, it's holidays. You know, you got to chill out at some point. Even someone like me.